Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. All right, let's have some fun with math and the reality of what's going on in the world. And first off, let me get something off my chest. Last week, I hate it when I make a mistake. Have you ever had that moment where you say something and you're walking down to your next meeting and go, oh, damn it. Last week I was walking through a series of different numbers, and one of them we were showing was what, because it was a proposal or a discussion coming out of the White House about taking the top tax rate and just letting it expire. I think I said it was $32.7 billion. That's for a single year. So just multiply it by 10. That's what the actual math would be. All right. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons I'm sort of stressed out of my mind right now is more than the chaos you see in some of the financial markets trying to understand the tariff issues and our leverage on other countries and their leverage, what's going on there. I don't think we're spending enough time talking about our own work. Last Friday, actually it may have been Saturday morning, the Senate passed their version of reconciliation budget, but completely unserious document. They basically, and I'm going to show over and over and over and over here, they took a pass on doing what was difficult. And if this is a negotiation between the House and the Senate, if you've ever bought a car or been in a negotiation, when one side gives you a completely unserious offer, you often have to walk away until they get serious, because there's real things going on in the world. Here's an article from the other day, and I have a small stack of these talking about bond markets and debt markets and others starting to unload U.S. debt. Today, if you're a geek and we're watching the 10-year bond, at one moment I was watching, and over about an hour or so period of time, I saw the 10-year bond move by about 20 basis points. Now, in geek speak, that's a big deal. Apparently, it's been like 5 years. And think about some of the crazy things that were going on 5 years ago to see that sort of movement. We're stressing the crap out of the markets. And the fact of the matter why that's important, this country borrows about $60,000, $70,000 every second. We borrow, that becomes what? $250 million every hour. Last year, for every dollar we took in tax receipts, we spent $1.39. The reality of it here is when 39 cents out of every dollar you're borrowing, for the $5 trillion we're going to take in tax receipts, we're going to spend like $7.2 trillion. Maybe you don't screw with your bankers. And the reality of it is your savings, this government's bond fund, the family on the other side of the world that has savings, that's the money that buys our debt. And the Ray Dalio, what is it, Bridgewater founder, has been doing these articles saying, you got a problem. And the basis of the problem is there's not enough capital in the world to deal with the binging of debt coming from the United States, coming from China, now starting to come from Europe. Now you saw that Germany looks like they're going to be lifting their debt caps. When we borrow, we're also competing with other countries in the world. United States, I think, is now maybe 13, maybe number 12 on the credit stack. Think of this. I believe Greece can sell a 10-year bond cheaper than the United States. That's worth thinking about. So let's actually walk through what's going on right now with the reconciliation budgets. And let's sort of explain, why do we do the reconciliation budgets? 1974 Budget Control Act created this mechanism that if you were going to cut spending, and it gives you one of the few times in life where you can actually work on mandatory spending, the things that are on autopilot, because for most members of Congress, in their entire career, everything they vote on is borrowed money. When we vote on defense, when we vote on non-defense discretionary, the things we do get to vote on, it's all borrowed, every dime of it. And last year, about $300–400 billion of mandatory earned benefits, those things, were on borrowed money. So start to understand. So here's what's going on. You've heard that we're doing these reconciliation budgets because that's a whole mechanism to be able to move something through the Senate where you only need 51 votes so it doesn't hit that 60-vote filibuster. That's the real reason we do this whole dance. But you remember how many people are so upset. David, you're going to cut spending. Over the next 10 years, this is the baseline money. Baseline. We're scheduled to spend $86 trillion over the next 10 years. And at best, the House resolution had $2 trillion of spending reductions and modernizations over 10 years. 86 is the baseline spending. We're talking about trying to trim $2 trillion out of the 86. And this causes people losing their minds. Have we lost our sanity in this country? You're telling me you can't find, that's what, 2.3%? Forgive my math, I'm trying to do it quickly. That's Armageddon. Does that give you a sense of just how addicted the bureaucracies, the society, the business models out there are to U.S. borrowing? And there was another thing that happened last week that really should have taken people's breath away. Now, this is sort of behind the paywall, so we caught other articles writing about it. Moody's Analytics, the people that sort of study what's going on in economics and business, put out a paper that in nine budget years, 30% of U.S. tax collections are going to go to just pay interest. So you pay your $100 in income taxes, 30 cents of it just went to interest. And this is before the Senate, or what we're trying to do in the budget reconciliation. Because remember, I'm going to show you the Senate document is completely unserious. It piles on stunning amounts of debt. But does this scare anyone? In 9 budget years, 30% of your taxes you pay go to just cover interest. I mean, am I just an idiot for coming behind this mic every week and trying to show the math? And I get my brothers and sisters around here, that was interesting, David. I'm still going to vote for piling on more debt because, well, let's be honest, my voters want stuff, and I'll be out of here by the time this blows up. It probably doesn't blow up. What happens is you hit a moment where the money required to finance the debt, like this, it consumes everything. You hit a moment. I showed a chart a month ago, that showed if we went back to a 6 handle, so a 6% interest rate on U.S. sovereign debts, which we were right up against in the early 2000s, 2005, 2006, we went to a 6% interest rate, about 45+% of all U.S. taxes went just to cover interest. If you go to 9%, it's the majority of U.S. taxes go just to cover interest. Part of that's because right now we're sitting on what 29, $30 trillion of publicly sold debt. So the actual debt is about 36.6 or something like that. We're in extraordinary measures, so the actual debt numbers are a little distorted right now because we're borrowing internally and we got to pay that all back. So watch interest rates pop when we finally raise the debt ceiling, and now we have to refund all that money back to the accounts plus the interest that they missed. But you start to think about, we have to refinance. And some of this gets refinanced 2 or 3, 4, or 5 times in a year because it's, you're borrowing 30 days, 6 months. So we will refinance about $9 trillion, and we're going to issue about 2.2 trillion new debt. So tiny movements of interest rates are really stressful. Federal Reserve, what was it, a week or so ago, lowered their economic growth projections for the United States for the next 3 years. Just that lowering. I think they lowered us from like 2.1 to 1.7% this year. That's almost $200 billion. of tax receipts in a single year. So just that movement of lowering down economic growth projections is more than we're talking about trying to reduce spending if you take it over 10 years. It's like this place is incapable of understanding the scale of the trouble we're in. And I've tried to show this a couple times. I'm not beating up anyone. I'm just asking people. I desperately want to extend the 2017 tax reform. I was on the committee. I'm one of only 4 or 5 people still on Ways and Means that actually helped write the 2017 tax reform. And those portions expire at the end of this year. I believe it's the absolute right thing to extend them. We should just pay for it. Because when we don't pay for it, our base number, now this is, you're going to see 2 differences here. We're using the next 10 years. So that takes us to 2035. The Senate budget, they did a gimmick. They used 2034. We couldn't figure out why we couldn't get the numbers to match up. They played a game of they only used 9 budget years. We're scheduled to borrow $22 trillion over the next 10 years. If we do all the tax reform, but don't do pay-fors, that's about, and then add interest on it, that's another 6.8. If you basically then add a number of the president's additional priorities, but don't pay for them, don't try to find, you end up at $74 trillion of borrowing in functioning 9 budget years, 10 years. I'm going to show you a couple boards here. If you actually add it up, we're functionally talking about almost doubling what took us 240 years in debt to build up. We're talking about doubling it. Well, close to doubling it. In the next 9 years, have we lost our minds? So, this is what you hear a number of us fussing about. We can't figure out what the Senate was thinking. Well, were they just an avoidance of, we don't want to tell anyone we're going to try to do something it's not even shouldn't be that hard. Remember, 86 trillion of spending, the House was just trying to do 2, and I thought 2 was absolutely anemic. We should have covered all 4.5 trillion. One of the hardest votes I made in my decade plus here was standing right there and swallowing, saying, I'm going to vote for this, but I'm really unhappy because we are capable of doing more. And if we don't start to telegraph to the bond markets, we're going to do something serious. At what moment does the bond market say, screw these people? They're just not serious. They're consuming the world's capital. Let's charge them more. Do you really think the United States, with our exorbitant privilege of having the world's reserve currency, being the country that people want to come and do their business in, move to, put their capital in, do you think that's our birthright? Remember, up until World War II, it was Great Britain had the world's reserve currency. We are squandering our place in the world. And people are running around saying, well, we need to push down the value of the dollar. So you have trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars around the world that are held by people, and you're going to push down the value of their holdings because, just understand, every time someone says something like that, you can actually start to see the full faith in United States start to taper away. We are about to squander this extraordinary privilege we have because the world trades in our currency. They need to buy our debt because they need to hold our currency because that's what they denominate in, that's what they trade in, that's their peg. And you look at this chart, new Senate budget resolution, functionally another 8.5 trillion in deficits. So here's extending the tax cuts in 2017, and then they made a margin there for additional spending. Either it be some of the other priorities, no tax on tips, no tax on overtimes, those things. And then we have another 520 billion in additional spending. But can you see this line here? You can't really see it. It's $3 billion of cuts. That's what they put onto their budget resolution. If we borrow $6 billion a day, and their budget resolution is 3, actually, we're borrowing is actually apparently a little more than $6 billion. It's 10, 12 hours of borrowing. for an entire year. And this is for 10-year budget. That's what they gave us. Oh, but David, when you guys start to negotiate, you'll actually fill it in. Except we're negotiating, we put $1.5 trillion of savings, and with hope getting to 2, and they give us $3 billion. Remember, a trillion's 1,000 billion. And you wonder why some of us are cranky. You know, when our colleagues down the hall give us basically crap to work with. So let's actually start to walk through what this actually means to us as a body. When we finished the last budget year, we were $28 trillion of publicly held debt. That's the debt we have to sell. When you hear someone say 37 trillion of debt, remember there's a portion of that we borrow internally. We reach into trust funds and other things. We borrow the money there. We pay interest on it. Anyone says, oh, you borrowed my Social Security money. Yes, and you got paid actually a pretty good interest rate back. But here's the baseline. Now, remember, why is this not 22 trillion? Because they were using a 2034 number. We caught them playing a game there. Then add another 6.9 trillion on top of that, and what do you get? Well, here's what you get. Functioning, when we all got elected this last November, United States sovereign debt was around $28 trillion. When we finish this 10-year cycle, we're going to add another $28 trillion if we do what the Senate sent us. What took us 240 years to build up, we're going to double in the next 9 budget years, next 10 calendar years. Go team, that's the morality of this place. But it's hard, David, to explain to people that we need to modernize, we need to change the way we deliver services, we need to use technology. And some programs we should just stop because they've been outdated for decades. This is important here. This is without any of the disaster aid. This is without the economic potential slowdown, and so tax receipts coming down. This is without a war. I mean, just using actually what were optimistic numbers of the next 10 years tax receipts. And what we're talking about right now doing is over the next 10 years doubling what took us 240 years to build up in debt. Does anyone care about your retirement? Does anyone have kids? Think of this. It may be insane, and my wife's my age. I have a 9-year-old daughter and a functionally two and a half year old little boy we've adopted. And yes, they're brother and sister, so that explains. When my little boy is functionally 24, 25 years old, every tax in the United States, every tax has to double just to maintain baseline services. The morality of we are raising kids that would be part of the first generation to be structurally poorer than their parents, because when you borrow money, it is a tax. It just means you're going to let someone else pay it with interest. It's not free money. It's a tax. Now, sometimes taking on a certain amount of debt is what you have to do, because the thing that actually Republicans, Democrats are terrified to tell our voters, next 10 years, almost 100% of U.S. sovereign debt is interest and Medicare. It's demographics. We got old. Mr. Speaker, one of the things going on in the entire Western world, and particularly also here in the United States, we don't have enough young people. If you actually look at our demographic curves, when you hear people talk about that, as soon as I say demographics, I know people turn the channel. There's a very good chance in the last 12 months we had more deaths than births. It wasn't supposed to happen for 7.5 years, according to the Census Bureau, but there's a couple data sets out there saying we may be up against already having more deaths than births. Then understand the way we deliver and finance the earned entitlements, the earned benefits, is today's worker pays for today's retirees. And last week I showed a number of charts that those numbers functionally in 10, 20 years, it's you and your partner, you and your spouse, and a little bit more, you have your own retired person you're paying for. That's not Republican or Democrat, it's demographics. In 2033, so what, 7.5 years from now, Social Security Trust Fund is empty. The law says you cut benefits. That would be a 21% cut, meaning in functionally 8 years, we double senior poverty in America. Yet, if you talk about how you want to try to save Social Security and all the steps you have to do and all the inputs, and because it turns out it's complicated. That side over there is going to run attack ads beating the crap out of you because you mentioned the word Social Security, even though you're trying not to double senior poverty. That's how immoral this place is. And remember, our math from last year is the first full year with the Social Security Trust Fund gone, just the shortfall is over $600 billion. The scale of what we're talking about is brutal. And Mr. Speaker, if you intend to be here another decade, you're going to get to deal with it. And every day we wait, that math gets more and more difficult. So let's go back to the Senate's reconciliation budget. Here's what they gave us. They're using a 2024 gross debt number of $21 trillion. It's really 22, but we'll let them because they made us some numbers in their budget. Remember, they played some games on their growth projections. But functionally, 32.7% of the next decade they gave us is borrowing, additional borrowing. They basically decided over the next decade, let's add another third of debt. What are we going to do? For those of us in the House who give these beautiful speeches of it's immoral to do this to our kids and crush people's future retirements, what are we going to do? Are we going to step up and say, look, Republicans, we have priorities. The White House has priorities. We just have to find ways to finance them. Are we that terrified to tell the truth? So, a couple more of these, and hopefully I won't have bored everyone to death. Senate budget provides for $5 trillion plus in new deficits over the next 10 years. And then you have to add in the additional spending. You start to go over, even our budget reconciliation, I thought was unacceptable. One of the hardest votes I made. I can't make up my mind how much I regret. Sometimes I really regret it. Some moments I'm hoping that the leadership team that said they would work with me, because I believe we can find $1 trillion in savings in just modernization. But remember, those inefficiencies are other people's business models. So you already see the hallways full of lobbyists trying to stop them. But you take a look here. Here's the debt we were going to add. Here's the additional debt the Senate adds. They functionally even double what we were talking about. Increasing the deficit results in higher interest costs. This is one of the things we forget to tell people the truth. There's a model out there, CBO actually ran it for me, saying if interest rates went up 1% on this policy baseline, and I'm tired of talking about it, in the 30-year window, you broke the Congressional Budget Office's model. Let me say that again. We broke the Congressional CBO's model. It went over 250%, except the problem is their computer only goes to 250%. It just hit it. We're now pushing levels of debt so high, we're breaking our budget models. Yay, go team. But even with what the Senate just gave us, over that 10-year period of time, stack on another $1.1 trillion of interest. Didn't buy anything, just interest. Senate borrowing, their instructions. The House proposed trying to get to $2 trillion in spending reductions. Dear heaven, I hope we can be tough enough disciplined enough to get there. I've produced all sorts of documents. I'm not one of those people giving speeches. I'm showing up with binders of ways you can get there. And much of it isn't cuts. It's just using technology to change the way we deliver services. The Senate, remember, $1 billion and $1 trillion are very, very different things. They functionally gave us $4 billion in spending reductions. That's what they thought we were worth. Mr. Speaker, I know I'm being a bit redundant on these boards, but I'm trying to make the point. We sure give a lot of great speeches around here of the greatest threat to our republic. Turns out to be the scale, the speed we are burying this society in debt. And then we hit moments like this, and we're going to happy talk our way through it. We're going to lie about things about, oh, we're going to make up a pretend growth rate, and that's going to produce $2.6 trillion. Our own reconciliation budget, there's going to be 1.7 of additional cuts in discretionary, but you can't really do that in a reconciliation budget. It's completely unenforceable. I mean, we should be ashamed of ourselves. But you look at something like this to understand the scale of what the Senate, the 2017 tax reform, in its full score of debt, and it turns out to come in at less than half that. You take a look at the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan, all these things that we as Republicans railed against because of the debt it produced. This is the Senate budget reconciliation, or the Senate reconciliation budget. Do you see why I'm angry? Or disappointed? Or just bewildered? Tax cut extensions without trying to make any attempt to pay for it. Remember how a moment ago I was telling you we start to break the budget models? Look, the driver of our debt ultimately is our demographics. And the left will say, no, you need to tax people more. Okay, but we've shown the studies over and over that every Democrat tax that's actually been proposed and scored produces about 1.5% of GDP. The cuts we've talked about are about 1% of GDP. So you got a big 2.5% there if we both did everything. Mr. Speaker, we're scheduled to borrow about 7.3% of the economy this year. Anyone see a math problem? Why is it so hard around here to tell the truth? We say things that just aren't mathematically true. And look, my family used to have a saying, at some point the math is going to win, and it always does. Mr. Speaker, thank you for tolerating my bit of my rant. But it's my way of just saying how disappointed I am with even my friends. I have a couple of really good friends that are over in the Senate. And they were just desperate to avoid doing what was difficult. And they threw it in our lap. Now we as House members, we get to make a decision. Are we going to do what's right and moral and actually sets up the future for economic growth? Very last point. Congressional Budget Office, almost 2 months ago, did a model that says if you want to maximize growth over the next decade, pay for as much of the tax extensions as you can. So do them, because that will maintain consumption. You don't get a lot of growth from it. Where you really get the growth is the expensing side and continuing some of the business tax, the pass-through tax portions. But if you pay for it, you don't screw up the capital stack, the money that you borrow for your small business, for your home, for your car. Looks like we're going to screw it all up. Let's not let that happen, Mr. Speaker. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.